Yeah, interesting. Servant leadership. Good morning. Oh, it's just made afternoon. I had anticipated that I will start in morning, so when I started my opening, I thought it will still be morning, but here we are in the afternoon. Yeah, once again, thanks to, ladies and gentlemen, to the International Center for Strategic Alliance for extending the invite to Bidvest. We really appreciate and we look forward to some of the engagements that have already taken place. So for us also, it's important to note and as a preamble to this conversation outline that this theme that you've chosen, it actually resonates quite well with Bidvest, given that we've been on a journey to build a digital bank. It's been a journey that is full of tears, it's been a journey that's full of surprises, but also lots of learning in terms of how we envisage the bank that we sought to be. I suppose many that follow our history and our story, we are born from a bank that was initially a forex bank. And I suppose when you obviously have one side of your story dependent on one single line of revenue, when there are turbulence and when there are issues such as COVID, it really challenges you to think differently. And I think that's where the unconventional started obviously brewing to say we probably need to think of this institution differently into how the market is also going and also the shape and the direction that the market is taking. So for us, it was important to look at that. And I suppose the other thing is we are also seeing probably a notable trend that is really growing from an SME perspective. We're seeing a lot of, you just mentioned Lesaka with the acquisition of Adumo. It's really keeping us on our feet. And it's a trend that we need to obviously respond to as Bidvest. It's a trend that we need to really be mindful of and really think large and long and hard about it and say, how do we then look at it? I mean, we've got our own business that talks to the merchant offerings as far as customers are concerned, but also customers are also looking for things that are different. And we do note the trends that we're seeing in the SME market, and that's basically what's going to be the center of my conversation today. And I suppose it's quite important to also outline that, in the SME space, there's quite it's notable and it's known that SME are actually the bloodline of an economy. And it's without say. And it's also an element where economy thrives and also where an economy is going to grow. And we'll share some stats that speaks to that, which supports that. And I think the other thing that is really important is also the fact that we really need to be mindful about how do we then support these SMEs? Because also in as much as they're the bloodline of the economy, they're also under threat. They're under threat because if you were to think of the stats, it says that there's a report that denotes that South Africa has the highest failure rates on the SME compared to the rest of the world, estimated about 80%. That's really shocking, and it's something that we really need to think about. So without further ado, these are some of the stats that really, for me, it's things we need to really think about. And it will be remiss of us not to delve into the topic that says SMEs reflect and create the context of our current landscape as part of the country. And I suppose also it's important to note that part of these SMEs that we are seeing, the World Bank denotes that the micro and small enterprises that we see here, there's an annual funding gap to a tune of $5.2 trillion US. That's basically 1.4 times more than the current level of the global landscape that we are seeing from a lending perspective. So, meaning banks are not borrowing to the SMEs. And that's a real fact. So how do these SMEs really thrive and how do they grow if financial institutions are not necessarily borrowing or even considering them? And not just this being one of the things that is a real challenge to them, the other point is that they are facing challenges as far as functions from a market's point of view. They're facing challenges as far as technology is concerned. There's also some burdensome regulation that appears to be some of the factors that suppresses some of this growth from an SME development perspective. So this problem is not immune to South Africa, as we can see that this is from a global perspective, but the reality that we really need to pay attention to applying the South African landscape, not to say that the global does not really give us much of a sense, is how do we as banks really think about this, and really, do we even lose sleepless nights when we think about this? And what is then our response? And all of this, we'll talk to it at the later point. It is quite clear that if you look at this side, there's a lot of depressing stats. And this depressing stats tells you that 67%, which is 2/3, have not secured funding, as I've alluded to. It talks to the 97% of SME in Singapore that would switch anytime if they have a better offer elsewhere. And it also talks about the 44 proportion of American SMEs who would apply traditional banks from a loans point of view, fail to, and so on. And this story continues. But the reality is there's also a positive light to it. The positive light is that while we undertake some of these challenges, I think we need to pride ourselves as an African continent that we've got about 250 million SMEs in Africa. That's a number that's quite big. If you were to obviously take this and contrast it to the current population of Africa, you will realize that we're just shy of 1/3 of that. So the reality is we do have SMEs that are encouraging and employing people as well. So, and I suppose the other piece is that the average size of SMEs is actually 5 to employees. So if that's the reality and that's the case, why do we have unemployment? If we have 250 and 250 million of those employ 5 people on average, we shouldn't be dealing with unemployment, isn't it? It's quite interesting. So, what then? It's quite important that we have taken time as Bidvest Bank to really think about these tough and long and real questions that we are faced up with, and it is therefore within our respective rights and obligation as countrymen to understand that we need to participate in the SME environment. And in participating in the SME environment, we really needed to understand that while there's regulation, and I've spoken about the burdensome regulations that are there from a country perspective and also some from a banking perspective, the reality is that we need to respond, we need to support the SMEs. So you will note that we were quite clear in our approach. And our approach says, let's define who are these SMEs. And let's understand what do they do. So I suppose in the opening remarks that I've mentioned, I made reference that, and I asked the empirical question that, how do we then respond to this? But the reality is that we need to start zoning in and understanding these SMEs. What do they do? What are they about? What's their journey? More so to even understand the life cycle of the SMEs. Ladies and gentlemen, simply put, SMEs are basically men and women, just like you and me, who have an ambition to create wealth and build legacy. They contribute to an economy, and the list is endless. But we as Bidvest, we've undertaken to listen and to learn from these SMEs. In listening, we have what we call and deemed the voice of the customer. What this does, it allows us an opportunity to listen. I often tell the colleagues in Bidvest Bank that when we go out and see and engage with customers, one client once referred to us and say, something very surprising and fascinating about you bankers. When you come and see me to talk about my business, you are always doing the talking for 45 minutes, and then you want me to respond in 15 minutes. And really, that struck a chord with me. Because the reality is that we're going out to understand this business, but we're doing more of the talking. It's about high time we shift things around and do more of the listening so that we can be able to understand, clearly articulate and understand what the problem is. Because as banks, we need to understand how do we respond in supporting these SMEs so that they can thrive at the end of the day. So in understanding this voice A lot of our SMEs are telling us various things. They're saying to us, help me start a business. How do I do that? Some are saying, help me just maintain what I have. I think I'm okay, I'm gonna just ride the wave, but help me maintain this business. But also are saying, help me grow. I need to expand. I've seen an opportunity of growth. How do I then expand and take advantage of this? But also there are clients that are also telling us a different story. To say, you know what, it's been a long haul. I think I need to exit, or I need to sell, or I need to merge. But how do we then look at this and even understand to a point of how then do we solve for it? Because all of these things are really underpinned by our responses, whether from an onboarding that customer, from obviously placing that customer at the center. And what we really, we've classified something that we really call moments of truth. I mean, we spoke earlier about Mr. Pretoria spoke about the voices of what we're hearing as far as debit checks and so on. But that is the important piece that we need to listen to. When the moment of truth hits for our business clients, how do we then support them? Someone says bankers are very strange again. When it's quite sunny and the sun is out and it's all shiny, you give me an umbrella. But when it's rainy, in rainy days, you take that umbrella away, which is quite fascinating. So there's a lot of thinking that we need to think and change. So what we also continue to say is that having heard the voice of the customer, our duty and our obligation is to be able to say, how do we place the customer at the center of what we do? Placing the customer of the center is just to fully be obsessed and obviously applying what we call client centricity. And in understanding the client centricity, it then allows us to be able to solution for that client adequately so. And also it fits within what they want to grow, where they want to go and their aspirations. Because a lot of time, as I mentioned, there's an element of growth and development. Others are just saying, I just want to invest, I just want to protect, I need to obviously pay and collect or settle, whatever the case could be. But our reality is that we've structured and formulated our business in such a way that it speaks to the center of the customer, to be able to ensure that we've got the right capabilities, we've got the right solutions, and the right people. And as much as we talk digital language innovation, ultimately we are human beings that relate to human beings. If we have the right people in front of us that are talking to the right clients, we are able to connect better, we are able to improve the livelihood of our customers. It's quite important to also reflect and just understand while we started with the global view, but also just to say, where are we going? What direction is the global economy going from a banking point of view? There's a market shift that reveals that banking sector is on a trajectory of significant expansion. We're seeing a lot of transformative waves. We're seeing a lot of financial inclusion that we never spoke to before. We're seeing a lot of digital capabilities being introduced. But also, equally so, there's regulatory that is also changing. There's quite a number of stuff that we just need to understand from a global landscape to say, when we grow, what does then this mean from a regulatory perspective? And it is our duty to also align, to also adapt into this. We do know that obviously currently we're not in the right space as it relates to regulatory. But it also challenges us from a customer point of view. There's an article that was released by the FSCA on how banks respond to clients, whether be it from a termination perspective and whether be it from a relationship perspective, because we're seeing a mushroom of obviously a lot of clients being exited with no clear understanding, but also do we really understand where do we place those customers at the center of what they do as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you evolution banking. Obviously, this is what we deem from our side. We've moved and transitioned quite a lot. There's been some significant progress that we've made as a bank, as a country, globally, that we are shifting things from traditional banking. We've introduced the concept of relationship banking. We've introduced partnerships on how do we then do partnerships and partner with other banks. Quite a lot in our space in the Bidvest Bank. We believe so much so that we've even created a whole division, which we call it Alliance Banking. Alliance Banking allows us to partner with fintechs that are quite agile and nimble, that have new thinking, new thoughts of doing ways. And then once we partner with those, we then have an opportunity to grow our customer base. Because then they're also looking for, obviously, banking license. They are also looking for opportunities to be able to grow, but they remain with some limitations in a as far as offering banking is concerned. So it is important that as banks, we should not shy away or push the fintechs. Fintechs should be embraced as part of the ecosystem as we bank and as we do business. So it's quite important that we have that thinking and that thought in our view. And therefore, that's when you are able to deliver the digital capability. What Paza was presenting to, it's a journey that banks need to participate, but in participation, there ought to be inclusion of other related parties and other players that might have a different thinking and a different way of doing business. Are we really receptive to that? And that's a big question. As I conclude, this is really some of the character traits that really also help us to understand our customers, to know the product value chain. I mean, these are no-brainers. Everybody thinks about this. Everybody talks about this, even in the current landscape that we have in our space, to say what are the objectives, what are the character traits that we need to be chasing, and understanding the Bidvest broader offering so that we can provide the right solutions to our customers. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to get to this point and obviously get to my conclusion and say that in the recent times, obviously I told a story about fatherhood. And this story about fatherhood, it was a conversation I had with an investment banker heading into the mining industry, where we personally, both of us, reflected on the topic around fatherhood, which we think, and I do think and strongly believe that it is such a blessing and a pleasant gift that God has granted manhood. What was more prevalent in this conversation was our generation of fatherhood has drastically changed, contrast to that of our forefathers. We are beginning to see a positive shift of loving, caring, and most importantly, present and involved fathers. While we appreciate the significant shift, we ought not to be complacent and naive, as the fatherhood challenges remain a big societal problem. And that societal problem speaks to the SME. So what am I saying? SME growth also resonates within a family environment. Once we solve for that particular problem, we are also solving for the SME. One might be wondering, what an intriguing phenomenon. The reality is, SMEs need to flourish. And in them flourishing, they need to be underpinned by the communal environment that requires strong relationship in our households, in our communities. The success of ancient businesses, as we all know it, was based on the barter trade, which was the exchange of goods and services between two parties and so on, and the story goes on. It is obviously considered that this is the oldest form of commerce. Individuals and companies barter and they obviously exchange goods and services. But the reality is, if we were to fast forward this, the current dispensation tells us that businesses that we are operating with, they are within a value chain, and it is our responsibility to ensure that we unlock these opportunities by simply working together and ensuring that we create the power of collaboration. It is therefore no secret that the long-term success and continued collaboration has to be the anchor of our businesses, notwithstanding the intriguing sustainable ways in your business and strategy, creating new ways to create work and culture shift. And I want to leave you with this as well, that there is no plan B in business. However, there are scenarios where opportunity meets preparation. Let us prepare ourselves for a greater reward of functional society of businesses, invariably growing our economy and profitable businesses. As I quote from a well-known banker, Lincoln Mali, he says, "We must not try to be Madiba. We must try to be our authentic selves, using Madiba's lessons to become even better versions of ourselves, not poor imitations of great men." I thank you.